it's Spider and welcome back to a new video. In this video, I'll be telling you guys how to build and launch a rocket in Spaceflight Simulator. It can be confusing, I get it. When I first played SFS and I built my first rocket, I could not even launch it. So I definitely get it, which is why I'm here to help you out. So first of all, you need to go to the play, obviously, and then you will be like greeted with different worlds. Of course, if you haven't played SFS before, by the way, I should have mentioned this before, but if my SFS looks weird, it looks different, it is because I am using the Steam version of SFS. But do not worry, because whatever I do in this version of SFS, whatever I talk about in this version of SFS also applies to the Android version and the iOS versions as well. So you are perfectly safe to follow my advice. Okay, now first you need to go to the play menu, and then you need to select a new world. If you are new to SFS, you will want to create a new world. Now, of course, here you'll have an option to rename your world, change the solar system. If you're playing this for the first time and you do not have any other planet packs, then you will only have the default version. But if you have different planet packs, if you have different planet packs installed, then you will have these different options as well. And then you have the difficulty: normal, realistic, hard. There is nothing much to explain here. Everything is just laid out in front of you, and then just create a new world and then just play. Okay, now we are at build rocket. Okay. Alright, we are greeted with this screen. Okay, now if you want to build a rocket, you first need to know about the basic thing, like the most essential part of a rocket, which is the rocket engines. Now, of course, we have these three engines right over here, but there are more engines if you go to the engines menu right over here. But these are all part of the expansions, so you don't need to worry about them. For this video, I'll only be using the basic parts. Okay, so first of all, if we tap or click on an engine right here, or like on any part, we can see all of these different properties, right? And if we drag these parts onto the build area, then if we tap on them again and then click on this icon, this sort of slider icon, then again we can see these sort of properties and some sort of extra features which will help us while we will be building the rocket. Of course, there is this like the mass of the part, which is 3.5 metric tons, and then there is the thrust it produces, which is 120 metric tons, and then there's the efficiency. Now, of course, we know what mass is and what thrust is. Mass is pretty simple and straightforward. It is the mass of the part, and the thrust is the force which the engine produces, and of course there is this efficiency. Now, what does this efficiency mean? As you guys might have assumed, that it means that how economical our engine is going to be with the fuel that we provided, and it is measured in ISP. Now, what is this ISP? Now, ISP stands for specific impulse. So the I is for impulse and the SP is for specific. And what specific impulse is that it is the change in velocity produced when the engine burns 1 unit of fuel. So with this sort of definition, we can see that an engine which produces more change in velocity with the same amount of fuel will have more efficiency. It will have more specific impulse. So if you see that this engine has a specific impulse of 240, and if you scroll down here, this engine has a specific impulse of 280. So this engine, this Valiant engine, is more efficient than this Hawk engine. So this is what specific impulse means and how it relates to efficiency. Okay, now let's come to building the rocket, the part which you guys came here for, the part which you guys clicked on this video for. So rockets are divided into stages. We have the first stage, second stage, third stage, upper stage, and stuff like that. And all of those different stages have different purposes. So if you look at the first stage, for example, we'll see that the first stage is the first stage of the rocket. It is a stage which fires first, and it is a stage which actually lifts the entire mass of the rocket, and it is a stage which acts against the Earth's force of gravity and against the Earth's atmospheric drag. So the first stage needs to produce a lot of thrust, which is why we use the very strongest engines for our first stage. So for example, the strongest engine that we have among these three is this engine, because it has a thrust of 120 tons, and this engine has a thrust of 40 tons, this engine has a thrust of 15 tons. So this is obviously the thrust winner here. Even though this engine, this Hawk engine, has a lower efficiency as compared to the Valiant engine, we will still use the Hawk engine because the Hawk engine has more thrust. That is what happens in the first stage. We have to sacrifice efficiency for thrust. Rocket propulsion is basically a balancing game. If you want to have more thrust, you will have to sacrifice on your efficiency. If you want to have more efficiency, you will have to sacrifice on your thrust. If I look at the most efficient engine that we have here, the iron engine, right? It has an efficiency of 1200 specific impulse, but a thrust of only 15 tons. So this engine is used when I need to be really efficient. So this engine is used when our need of efficiency is so high that we do not care about the thrust. Rocket propulsion is a balancing game. In order to have thrust, you will need to sacrifice efficiency. In order to have efficiency, you will need to sacrifice thrust. Now, for our first stage, we need to have that thrust. So we will have to sacrifice that efficiency. So I'm going to use this Hawk engine right here. Okay. Now let's go back to the basic parts. Okay, so now that we have this engine here, we need to add a fuel tank which actually feeds the fuel into the engine to produce thrust. And for that, we have the fuel tank right here, and this one fuel tank won't be enough, so I'm gonna add this one here as well, and I suppose this will be enough. We'll find out soon enough. Okay, so this is now the first stage of the rocket, and in order to get to the second stage of the orbit, we need to add a separator here which separates the first stage from the rest of the rocket. And now by the time the first stage actually uses up all of this fuel here and it runs dry, we will be really high up in the atmosphere. So by that time, we will not have the need for high thrust engines, so we can switch over to a high efficiency engine. And I can add this engine here, which is the Valiant engine, and I am adding this engine here because it has a high efficiency and also a high amount of thrust, so that is like the best of both worlds. So I'm gonna add this engine right here and add a fuel tank right over here. And now you'll see that the separator binds with the fuel tank. Not actually binds, I don't know what the word is for. The word is, I think, connected. Yeah, that is the right word. Okay, so now these both are connected. Okay, so what will happen is that when we launch the rocket, this engine will start running, and then these two fuel tanks will be used up. And when these fuel tanks are empty, I will activate this separator here, which separates this whole first stage and like drops it down, so that we are left with the rest of the rocket right over here. So this is the first stage and this is the second stage. And by the way, how I moved these parts was that I just right clicked and just selected them. But if you are on a mobile device, you can just click on these parts and just select them as well. So that's pretty neat. Okay, so this is like a pretty basic rocket. I think this will get us through the atmosphere. I think we can cross the atmosphere with this one. So I'm just gonna add a control unit now, because we need to have something which controls a rocket, right? So there are two types of control units. First is the capsule right here, and the second is the space probe right here. So a probe is unmanned and a capsule is manned. So when you're going on missions like this, I think the difference between a capsule and a probe is just stylistic. So I want an aerodynamic end, so I'm gonna go with the capsule, and I'm gonna top it off with a parachute because I want that aerodynamic end to sort of curve on. So this is a pretty basic rocket, a pretty simple rocket, and I'm gonna launch it right now. This is the button to launch it. Obviously, like it says launch. And it says that my rocket has no heat shield, which means if I were to re-enter, my rocket would suffer heat damage. And the heat shield that they are talking about is right here, and it has like a heat limit of 6000 degrees Celsius and a separation force and stuff like that. But I will not be using a heat shield in this mission because I'm just going up and down, and I don't care what happens to my rocket because this is not a very good rocket, right? So if I were to add a heat shield, I would add it right over here, like right under my capsule, because I want my astronaut to be safe. And as you can see, the heat shield does not join with the fuel tank. So what we can do to fix this is that we can just move this entire thing up by one block and just add a separator here as well. So now this separator joins to the capsule and the heat shield is connected to the capsule as well. So the heat shield is sort of separates from the rest of the rocket whenever we want to. And there we go. Okay, now let's launch it. And hold on, I forgot to tell you one thing. So just escape and revert to build. Okay, so this is my thrust to weight ratio, and what the thrust to weight ratio is that it is just the ratio between the thrust which your active stage produces. Like right now my active stage is the first stage, so only the thrust from the first stage is showing up. Like the thrust here says that it is 120 metric tons of thrust, which means that only my Hawk engine will be running. If I were to add this engine right over here, it would yeah, so if I were to add this engine right over here, it would add both of these thrusts. So like 120 plus 40 tons. so 160 tons. But since this engine is in my second stage, it is not adding this thrust. So my thrust to weight is 2.34, which means my rocket produces 2.34 times more thrust than its own mass. And now in order to lift off, my rocket does need to produce more thrust than its own mass, which means my thrust to weight ratio should be definitely more than 1. Because if my thrust to weight ratio is not more than 1, then my rocket will not lift off. So you will need to make sure that your thrust to weight ratio is more than 1, and ideally it should be around 1.3 to 1.4. I think 1.4 is a bit too much, so like around 1.3 to 1.35. That is the balanced scenario, but this is not a balanced scenario because I will be going in super quickly because my thrust is more than double my mass. So that will be interesting to see, and I'm willing to see that with you guys right now. So let's go. Now, how you launch a rocket is that you first need to click or tap on the engine right here. And that is what you do with any other part. Like if you want to activate a part, you will need to click or tap on it. So now when I click or tap on the part right here, see, it says engine on. And why I moved the rocket was because I wanted to make it visible. Like I can still do this like this, but the engine on is now not visible. So I moved the rocket, right? So it says engine on when I tap on the rocket, like click off, click on, stuff like that. So now my engine is on, and if you are on a mobile device, then you can see like a slider right over here, and the slider is actually your throttle. So like when it says 50% on my throttle right here, it should say 50% on your slider right here, and above that slider should be your on or off button, which is my ignition button right here. So if you are on Steam version like me, then you can just click on this help thing and you can just learn all of the keys for activating stuff and stuff like that. Now escape. Okay, so now that we want to launch our rocket, we first need to turn our engine on. Mine was already on, my bad. We need to turn the engine on, and then we need to turn the throttle to 100, which means that you will have to use the slider and turn it to 100. So I'm just gonna use the key here, which is the left shift key, and turn it to 100. And then if you are on a mobile device, then you should turn on, like that on button right here, but I don't have that, so I'm gonna use the ignition button here. Ignition, and there we go. Our rocket has now lifted off. Yeah, our rocket has now lifted off, and there we go. It is going pretty good. And if I go to the map button right over here, there we go. It shows my apoapsis. Now what my apoapsis means is that it is the highest point in my trajectory, and what the periapsis means, it is the lowest point in my trajectory. But since my trajectory is a straight line just up and down, my apoapsis is increasing, but my periapsis is still at ground level because ultimately I will crash down to the ground. And oh my god, I have launched way past the atmosphere. And as you can see now, my capsule is sort of experiencing heat because it is going through the atmosphere. So the atmospheric drag is sort of increasing the heat of my capsule. And now my first stage is out of fuel. So now if I click on this separator right here, it separates the first stage. All right, 3, 2, 1, go. There we go. See? And if I click on this engine right here, my second stage will start running, and I will start accelerating even more. So there we go. And my second engine is now running, and I'm still going up really far, and I'm scared. So I'm just gonna stop this engine right now, and I am about to separate from this second stage so that I only have my capsule on me. So 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, so now I only have my capsule, and all of the stages are now... Where's my first stage? I can't even see my first stage. It is now gone. Alright, so now I only have my capsule. Now, if you want to sort of destroy all of your spent stages, what you can do right now, like this is my capsule right now, and this is, I'm assuming, the first stage. So if you want to destroy all of your left out stages, then you can just go to the menu here. Well, for you it will be here, but for me it is the escape button. So go to the menu here and click on clear debris, and just clear debris. What that does is that it just deletes every part which does not have a controller inside it. So this capsule was a controller, but these stages which were now left out, which were now separated, they didn't have a capsule or a space probe, so now they were just deleted when I press clear debris. So now my velocity will keep on decreasing because I am going against the force of gravity. I am going up, so gravity is now dragging me down, is now pulling me down. So my velocity will decrease until I reach this height, and when I reach my apoapsis, my gravity will turn 0, and then I will fall back to the ground again. So if I just fast forward right here, like these buttons do the thing. And this, by the way, is a mod, and so is like this thing here. These things are a mod which helps me examine my flight path better, so you guys won't have it. Don't worry, it is not a problem. You can install it if you are on PC version though, because mods don't work on the mobile version, so that sucks. And now I am at almost at my apoapsis, my 9 and 6. So now my velocity will just keep on decreasing. I'm just gonna time accelerate more, and now now my velocity has gone to 0, and it is now going back, and it is now increasing. Now if I time accelerate even more, I will find myself at the edge of the atmosphere, and now I'm supposed to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, and this is where the heat shield comes in. See, the heat shield is now heating up, and it's heating up really fast, and I'm going really fast. Oh my god, I hope I don't... Oh my god, is it fine? Is it fine? Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, it's fine. Okay, pretty good. Okay, thank god for the heat shield, right? It's at 1800 degrees Celsius. Did you see that? Wow. Okay, so now we have to use the parachute. Now, if you click on this parachute right here, it says that parachute half deployed, and what it means is that when you are below 2500 meters of height, then you can deploy your parachute, but it only says half deployed because you cannot deploy your parachute fully until you are at 500 meters of height. Now I am gradually, silkily, is that a word, silkily? I don't know. And there we go. I have now lifted off, reached space, and landed. Cool. Now I can recover this, and what this does is that I can go back to my building screen, and my achievements will be there. So like if I recover this, I have now earned these achievements, and if I click on continue, Space Center. Now I went to the Space Center, and now I have these achievements on me. So these are all different achievements which you can achieve. Okay, now let's build a new rocket, and let's just continue building this one, because I have yet another thing to tell you, which is staging. Now you might be wondering what this one button means, right? So this is the staging button, and what this does is that since we had to like manually click on the engine, right? Manually click on the separator, manually click on the parachute. So this button sort of takes care for that, because right now we have only one engine, but there will be rockets when you will have like more than one engine, when you will have 3 engines or 4 engines or 5 engines, right? So in order to save you time in activating these engines individually, what you can do is that you can just add these engines to a stage. Wow, voice crack. So this thing is the staging button right here, and if I click on this, I will have my first stage. So what my first stage is that it is my engine. I want this engine to be activated first, and then I'm going to click add a new stage, and then I'm going to add a separator. So first my engine activates, then my separator activates, and then my engine activates, right? And then my separator activates, and then I go up, and then I return down. So I want to activate my parachute, and like these are the 5 stages. So if I click on launch here, this little button right here is going to activate all of these stages without me having to click on these engines individually. So like if I set my throttle to 100, and if I click on ignition, then I can just press this button and my engine will start running. And then if I just stop ignition and then click on this button, there we go. Now the separator has been activated. If I click on ignition again, because I want to activate this engine, And then I want to click on this engine. Now my engine is now activated. Stop ignition, separator, and then we have the parachute. Wow, my parts are now crashing into the earth, which is scary. But luckily I have my parachute with me. Okay, so now you will see that the parachute opens on its own. You don't need to worry about that. Okay, so this was a simple demonstration, but I can use another example here. Like, for example, if my first stage has these engines as well, right? If my first stage is like this, I have these two engines here as well. And I need to be aerodynamic, so I'm gonna add this thing right here. And I can add this thing and just flip this thing right here. There we go. So now this is my first stage. Like, right, these three engines are now my first stage. I want to activate these three engines, and then I have to go ignition. See, these three engines are my first stage. So I don't want to activate all of these engines individually. What I can do is that I can just click on the first stage and then just add this engine and this engine to the first stage and then click on launch. Now my first stage is automatically this engine. So if I click ignition and if I activate my first stage, these engines have now been activated. And now if I set my throttle to 100%, oh my god, that is loud. That is loud. Oh my god, my ears are dead. See, this is why the staging button comes in handy. Boop. Boop. And boop. Oh wait, I can't deploy. Oh no, I'm gonna crash. Clear debris. There we go. Saved it. Okay, so this was how you build a rocket, and I still have some other things to tell you guys, which is this menu right here. Now this is obviously the part settings thing, like the part statistics things, the part like this basically tells you what the part is and how it functions. And then this is the duplicate button. Pretty simple. This is the rotation button. Pretty simple, right? This is the rotation button, but in the opposite direction. So like anti-clockwise and clockwise, your pick. This is the flip button, which flips the parts. This was how you build a rocket in Spaceflight Simulator, and this was how you launch it. So if you want to build more complicated rockets, you first need to start with this rocket, and then you will need to experiment, right? The best thing about any sandbox game is experimenting. So if you want to learn more about rockets, then you need to experiment on this basic rocket, because this one rocket has a lot of thrust. So what you can do is that you can sort of remove this one fuel tank and just bring this whole thing down, and then you can try to see what happens. Or you can just get rid of the second stage altogether and then just have the first stage in itself. So just experiment and go wild. I just taught you the basics of how to do things. What to do is all up to you. So go creative, go wild. And if you think that you're ready to move on to the next step, which is going to an orbit around the earth, then make sure to click on this video right here. And I'll see you guys in this video. Bye.